that we have to use these means of sharing this message. And you know, when my grandfather was a doctor, the idea that you would question the doctor was unheard of. I mean, he was one of the old school. You went to the doctor and you did exactly what the doctor said. We don't live in that era anymore. And I think the best doctors know that. And so they are open to more information. They are open to
Right.
learning what's out there on YouTube. So I feel like almost a responsibility to be out there talking about it. It really, because it can help more people, it can really at least give people more options.
Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. When trying to make decisions about which diet is best for you, it's hard to know what to believe or trust. That's because there are many flaws with nutritional science that make it unreliable. One major reason for this is the sheer complexity of the human body and how it processes different nutrients. Our bodies are unique and may react differently to certain foods, making it difficult to generalize what is best for everyone. Another issue is the lack of long term studies on diets, as most research tends to focus on short term results, making it challenging to determine the true effects of a diet over a prolonged period of time. Additionally, many studies are funded by industry groups or biased sources, leading to potential conflicts of interest that can skew the results. So what are we to do? Well, what I've done is to try to rely on the best evidence possible, recognize its limitations, and work with patients to experiment until we find the diet that serves them best. Today, I thought it would be fun to spend some time with a guest who has found that the carnivore diet has served him well, just like me, and look at one of the oldest carnivore studies along the way. Today's guest is better known as the Carnivore Rabbi, Evan Moffic, right?
Got it.
Like myself, today's guest was having stomach problems and found that the best solution was eating an animal based diet. He has a growing YouTube channel, and I'm really happy that he has it because that's how I found him. And when he started talking about this old carnivore study, I said, "What are you talking about, Rabbi?" So I decided to bring him along for the ride. So I appreciate you, Evan, for being here, and I welcome you to the podcast, my friend.
Well, thanks, Dr. Hampton. I'm a longtime fan and was just quite honored when you reached out.
Yeah, well, I was shocked as I listened to some of your content to hear you mention Chicago. I said, "What is he talking about? Is he visiting? Is he just passing through?" So it was nice to know that you were in the Chicagoland area. And it's not often, except for my patient testimonial podcast, that I get a chance to talk to someone who's an influencer. Uh, and I'm really excited about that. So I know we'll be at some point having a ribeye together. So I'm
Oh,
looking
yeah.
forward to that. Absolutely. Now, I want you to tell me a little bit about your origins in Chicago. I mean, were you here your entire life, or is this something that you kind of found yourself in the area for a different
Well,
reason?
actually, no, interestingly, so my dad is from Chicago. He grew up on the north side, Peterson Park area.
Cool.
And my mom grew up in Milwaukee. And they met
Mm,
in college. But my dad's a physician, he's a psychiatrist, and he taught at Baylor Medical School in
mm,
Houston. So I was actually born in Houston.
wow.
But then when I was 11, they wanted to move back closer to their parents. And
Okay.
so we moved to Milwaukee. So I grew up in Milwaukee. And when you're from Milwaukee, it's kind of likely that you'll end up in Chicago.
Yeah.
Unless your family has a small business or something that keeps you there. Chicago is sort of the magnet of the Midwest. And my sister ended up here. She's 7 years older. So after rabbinical school, because my wife's a rabbi also, we knew we had to be in a big city. We both wanted to find jobs, and Chicago was the natural choice. And I've just been very lucky. It's such a wonderful place to live. It's got,
Yeah.
like any city, it's got its problems, but it's
Yeah.
just incredible in terms of the resources, opportunities, people.
Yeah. I mean, you can stereotype a city, but I tell you, it's easily one of the best cities to live in. We were even having conversations about the weather, and you do have a winter here, but
Getting better.
Yeah, and it's got to be global warming, I'm assuming, because we have not had those crazy winters of the past where the snows, were covering the cars and all of that nonsense that we remember from the past. So it's different now.
So
Yeah.
true. I mean, it's kind of sad, but if you live here, it's nice.
It's not bad, right? And certainly the fears, even though we recently had a little bit of a tornado scare, if but honestly, other than a few trees here and there, it was just not you just don't get the disastrous types of weather events when you live in this part of the world. So I do think that there's a lot to enjoy about the city. Now, I grew up on the west side of the city, and you see a lot of Baptist churches, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And and one of the things that would always be mentioned by the pastors is that, when you are looking to thinking about getting to the spiritual profession, there's a calling, there's a calling, right? So I'm curious for you, what led you to become a spiritual leader?
Yeah. It was kind of a calling. And
Hmm.
it was a rational calling, but my dad being a physician, my mom's a teacher. So I kind of grew up with parents who were healers. They cared about serving others. And that was something I aspired to. Although when I went to college, I kind of had so many interests. I thought I would end up going to law school. I did debate. I did policy debate in high school, and that was my thing. I loved it. I was so into it. And so I thought, I majored in history and I thought I'd go to law school.
Hmm.
But I found that I really loved working with people. I loved teaching. And I was lucky enough. I had two great rabbis growing up in Houston and then Milwaukee. People that were well spoken, they cared about the community, they were respected, they were good teachers. And they were kind, and I just kind of looked up to them. So I thought, hey, wait a minute. This combines everything I love to do. I love to teach. I love to connect with people. I care about Judaism and Israel and community. And I thought being a lawyer was, something that was almost a little too conventional. I said, I want to do something different where I can really heal and be in the community. And so it kind of came together that way. And I feel very lucky. If I hadn't had those two um, role models growing up. I don't think I would have done it. And I come from my dad's a physician and my grandpa was a physician. And my grandpa talks about how the doctors he grew up with, I mean, he was from the day when they made house calls and all that, that it was something that inspired and guided him. And I think the same thing with rabbis.
Nice. I have a little thing you may not know about me, which is I went to the Chicago Medical School, Rosalind Franklin University,
Sure.
and for those who are not familiar, it's basically a medical school that was I don't know all the history, but I know it had a strong Jewish background, and the thing that I particularly liked about the school is, and I think it's more. I don't know why they were so um, interested in reaching out to communities of color, but they had a wonderful program called the Champs program. It wasn't really the school's program, but it was, I think that's a University of Illinois program, but they embraced it and allowed people who wanted to go to medical school, maybe didn't get in, or, and then created programs to help communities of color to get into medical school. So if I was in a class of, you wouldn't have no more than about maybe 10 to 15, maybe African Americans, for example. It's a good chance that 80% of them came through that program. So
That's
imagine, could you imagine if they didn't have the program? I
amazing.
mean, it's so that's what, so I've always had this strong connection uh with that community. I also appreciated all the extra holidays we got.
If I remember correctly, I'm not
Yeah,
positive about this,
yeah.
but I know there was a period of time where Northwestern Medical School did not admit any Jewish students, or there was a tiny quota. And I think that
Maybe that
part of
may
the
have led
starting
to
of
it.
Rosalind
Yeah.
Franklin people
Yeah.
that said, well, if they're not going to let us in, we're going to start our own.
That's right. And that's what you have to do, man. And I wish I knew that history perfectly, but I wouldn't doubt it. And I just want to live in a world where we, honor and respect everybody. And I think what different people with different backgrounds, and I literally remember sitting at the table and you'd have somebody like myself, you'd have somebody from India, somebody who had a Jewish background, somebody that was maybe Asian, Pacific, just different backgrounds at the same table. And we're, doing our thing, trying to get through the rigors of medical school. But I just wanted to throw that little nugget in. And when
Great.
I thought about you and I thought about you being local, I have a lot of love for them. I appreciate them.
Where are you now? Are you on the south side by because that's where the hospital is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. From a clinical perspective, I definitely work with Advocate Health on the south side, like on 98th and Western.
Okay.
I still live in western suburbs, so I'm like Oak Park area, but
Okay.
yeah, it's so I do that little commute. But again, and for me, it's worth it because the people I live next to don't really need me the way that the people on the south side of Chicago do, right? So I think they'll be okay. But I shouldn't say that because whenever we just had a block party. And during the black part, man, they look at me like they still look at us. We're both kind of like, unicorns because you're having conversations about nutrition. And like literally, it's like I end up being like the center of attention because everybody's like, what is this guy talking about? And they kind of know now, but
Right.
they're always curious about, how things are going in the low carb space. And so it's so I shouldn't say the need is greater because honestly, the neighbors struggle too. They may have more resources,
That's right.
but in terms of what they're doing, and it must be so frustrating to have more resources and you still are struggling because the recommendations that people are given are just not getting the job done. So we have a lot of work to do, and that's why I'm happy you've kind of joined the world of spreading the message. I really appreciate that. I really do.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about, um, why carnivore. Um, I mean, come on now. There's first let me before I even go there, I'm still a unicorn, right? In my world. I can only imagine that you don't go to your world and see a lot of carnivores either. So what has that been? What's been the response from your religious community?
Well, it's funny. My synagogue, they all, I think they kind of find it shocking, but I don't preach it. I don't
Right.
proselytize, but on one hand, they're very happy because I've never had more energy. I've never been
Right.
healthier. And they're happy to have a rabbi that's healthy and active and
Right.
involved. And so there is a kind of respect for it. And,
Yeah.
I just celebrated 15 years at my synagogue, and it's just I'm very lucky. It's a wonderful community. I'm up in Highland Park, and
Okay.
it's just that's where the synagogue is. I live close by, but it is just I'm very blessed. And we had a 15-year celebration, big party, and the guy who was emceeing the whole event said, we're so happy we got Rabbi Moffic some gifts. We know what he really wants. He's just a big fat piece of steak, but that wouldn't be appropriate. So, they kind of have accepted that that's me.
That's right.
And so that's okay. Initially, I remember when I first was carnivore, I was kind of shy about it. If somebody like wanted to go to lunch with me, I would kind of redirect, well, why don't we go to this restaurant? Now
Right.
I'm just like, you know what? I really only eat this. We can either have coffee or, we
Right.
could go to this where I can get a burger or something. So
Right.
I've become more just kind of comfortable with it. And I think it rubs off. Maybe said it's almost unconsciously. I think
That's
people
right.
pick up. This is a good way of life.
Yeah. And also, if you think about it, when people have an agenda, they may then have people push back. But honestly, only agenda we have is that if people are interested in healing, we have an option for them.
That's right.
You don't have to take that option, but
Mhm.
our goal is just to make sure you are aware that this option is there. And I really, for me, I think it's almost like a person who stresses about, they're embarrassed about something, and they honestly, they walk into a Cubs game and they think everybody's looking at them, but they're really not looking at you. You know
So
what I mean?
true. So
They're
true.
just not. They're just not.
People are
So
thinking
we
about
have,
themselves. I
yeah,
always people you could some once in a while if I'm at like a small dinner party and
yeah.
some might say, "Oh, that's a little strange," and then
Right.
you
And
forget
then you
about
just move
it.
on, right, yeah, it's like yeah, I remember when I was more keto and, it was so I mean, I always would order, like, berries and put whipped cream on it, right, and they would be like, "How did you get that?"
Yeah.
It wasn't on the menu, I was like, "I asked," you know? So, you just have to ask, and that even happened, that happens sometimes when you're on a cruise and you're kinda they will do whatever you ask them to, so you just have to ask
That's
and
right.
people will honor that. But yeah, it's and I'm just happy we're having more and more people to socialize this so that again, for those who wanna do it and find benefit that they, can be more comfortable because some people need that. We may be a little bit more rebel-ish and we're like, "We're gonna do what's working," but other people need to have a little bit of a community. So let's go back to the question I was gonna ask, which is, how did you end up in this carnivore space in the first place?
Well, it started with keto back in 2018. But
Mhm.
even before keto, I had always just had some stomach pain. It
Mm.
wasn't horrible, wasn't but I remember as far back as middle school, like, I would just get a little stomach ache after I ate, and it was always an I would get my stomach would gurgle. It was just I was just uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Um, and after a while, sometimes it would go away if I had a hard workout, it would go away. But it was just this sort of low level comfort that I kind of thought I'll just have to live with it for the rest of my life. I'd have bad gas, just all right, whatever. The doctor that I would see would say, "Well, take some Beano." I think that's what he said.
Yeah.
And I never did. And then sometimes they would say, try the Mediterranean diet. I remember getting a colonoscopy when I was 25, 26 because of the
Wow.
stomach pain. And they basically said, oh, you might have mild IBS, but it was really just kind of this, I just figured I just live with it.
That's right.
And then um, I learned about keto and I said, I'm gonna try this. And at that point, I didn't have much weight to lose, but I was probably about 15 to 20 pounds overweight. And within a couple of months, it was gone. Like literally, it took off weight so easily. And I did have more energy. But the stomach pain was still there. The
Right.
gas was still there,
Yeah.
but I saw this remarkable improvement in my just sort of overall health. And then I learned about carnivore. It was some videos you did, some from Dr. Chafee, and I said, I'd always loved meat. My mom now tells me when I was a kid, I would sometimes just say, "Give me some ground beef, like just plain for dinner." That's all I wanted. So
That's
I have
right.
always had a kind of love of meat, and so I said, "I'll give this a try."
Mhm.
And it was. I know it sometimes takes a while for some people, but for me, it was almost instant
That's
change.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was more energy. It was clearing up the brain fog. I started lifting weights again. I hadn't lifted weights in about 15 years, really. And
Wow.
um, I write, so both for my job and some books I've written, and I was able to write more in the same amount of time. It was really the most interesting thing to me is when I was a kid, I played piano and I
Mhm.
loved classical music, just loved it. I played violin, I played piano. It was just, my dad, loves music was always around the house. I just kind of forgotten about it. Just listen to the music everyone else listens to. For some reason, I think it was just clearing of the brain fog. I started listening to classical music again and appreciating it again. And it was just the strangest things. Um, and so it was, it didn't really even lose that much more weight. I think it probably lost another 5 pounds, but the major
Mhm.
weight loss came on keto. Carnivore was for the brain.
Right.
To me, that was so appealing and powerful. I a little bit of me felt angry. Like, why didn't I know about this before?
I know.
I had all this stomach pain. And
Especially
um,
during school, man. I could have used it back then. Jeez.
Totally.
Wow.
So I just felt so grateful for it. And it really just it launched, I almost think it was like a turning point. I'm 46 now. And so this was when I was about 43, 44. And that's like a big, I love studying sort of positive psychology. When guys are in their mid 40s, that's like a big turning point. It's kind of like you're reaching middle age. You're kind of starting to, your kids are a little bit older. You're at a new phase of life. And a lot of people get depressed then, the midlife
Yeah.
crisis. I kind of felt like carnivore lifted me out of that. It was
Yeah.
very powerful.
Yeah, and it does, and my story is very similar, and in terms of the stomach symptoms, and you're right, man. Things got so much better when I went low carb, but then when I tried plant based, it was still better, but it was just not. The gas was out of control,
Yes.
and there's not enough Beano. The Beano helps,
Right.
it doesn't help enough.
Right.
And just having to just deal with the inconvenience of feeling bloated,
That's right.
um, always worrying about where the bathroom is, all of that nonsense, and it's like the hunger.
Mm.
But I agree with you. I don't know that I appreciated the mental clarity until I just kinda had an aha moment. I think it may have been after just listening to other people talk about it, and I was like, "You know what? I am a little bit more, cheerful at work. I've always been a positive person,
Me too.
but the energy part, I was kinda dragging through the day.
Hmm.
Now it's like, you got that 4:30 patient, that 5 o'clock patient, been there since 6 or 7 in the morning, and you're still like you're just like
You keep going.
and it's rather you had lunch or not.
Hmm.
I mean, it's just the bizarrest thing. It's a rare day when I get to lunch. For me, it ends up being between 12 and 1, like most people. It's a rare day that I get to lunch and I'm like hungry. I just kind of eat because it's lunchtime.
Right.
I can't get enough in once a day, so I tend to do a 12 to 8 kind of thing, 12 to
Okay.
7.
Are you
But
seeing patients mostly in the office, or do you do telemedicine too?
it's mostly in the office. In fact, it's gonna be almost 100%. I was kinda doing like a Wednesday virtual. Now, of course, when the pandemic was going on, it was pretty much everybody, but a lot of these health systems, there's not a lot of people who are really efficient at virtual work.
Mm.
So instead of just saying we'll let the people who are efficient do it, they just make everybody come into the office, right? And there are advantages of coming into the office because you have walk-ins and obviously sometimes seeing things up close and personal. And then the population I serve is older, so they kind of like to come in.
Yeah.
The young folk, they're just like, listen, I just need an antibody for my,
Right.
and they just want to make it convenient, and they're doing it during their like break at work. But so I think we should embrace virtual work a little bit more. And then for people who are able to be efficient, and when I say efficient, I'm talking about they can still pay the bills by seeing enough people, and obviously the laws allow for that to be possible. I think that would be better. But yeah, I love virtual work because you can kind of have a load of clothes going. It's good for physician and advanced practice clinician well-being. I think that if we're going to be serious about well-being, we have to give people some flexibility.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's something I'm always going to advocate for, and we'll continue to do that. So now, some of the people you follow, like a Dr. Anthony Chafee's a little stricter.
Yeah.
And then you have others. I'm sure Dr. Barry will have a Barry periodically because it's in his name. But, you got to do that. So where are you on that spectrum? I mean, in terms of what your body needs,
Yeah.
what
I've
have you
become
found
much stricter.
necessary?
I,
Yeah.
I, it's interesting. When I started off, I was doing all kinds of meats. I
Mhm,
would do chicken, turkey,
mhm.
beef, everything. I drank Zevia. I would drink Diet Coke. I would do basically. I was going after zero carb, but that was really the sole goal.
Right.
Over time, I gravitated more and more to beef and
Mm.
lamb too, just because I found it made me feel best.
Yeah.
And then, really, since about January of this year, it was already trending that way. But in January, I just said to myself, you know what? I always just feel much better on beef. I'm just going to eat beef.
Yeah.
I pretty much stuck to it. Occasionally I had a, it's funny, I had a burst appendix. And so when I was in Philadelphia with my daughter, she was looking at colleges. And so I ended up at Penn Hospital, which was a great
Mhm.
hospital, but it was
No
wonderful.
doubt about it. Yeah.
They were great, but I was there for 3 nights. So I ended up eating some eggs and stuff too. So obviously I couldn't keep it in total while I was there, but I've been pretty consistent um, with beef. And I now, again, this just naturally happened, kind of went to one meal a day.
Mm.
Um, my schedule is such that, I mean, every day is different, but usually I have some time kind of mid-afternoon, and that's when I'll usually eat. And I
Yeah.
try to eat about 2 to 2.5 pounds. When I
Yeah.
tell people that aren't carnivore, they're like,
Yeah, I know.
but it's great. And
Yeah.
I was kind of persuaded into that a little bit. I mean, it was sort of came naturally, but Dr. Kiltz talked a lot about that, about one
Yeah.
meal a day.
Yeah.
And I thought his logic was great.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been my pattern now.
Yeah.
And it's working.
Yeah, and I know when I was I don't know if this was during my obesity training. It may have been during my nutrition and functional medicine, but this, 60%, if you're eating 3 meals a day, snacks, 60% of your energy expenditure is being used for digestion. I mean, what
Interesting.
a waste,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
if you just break it down to one time a day, all the good stuff that your body can do to keep you healthy, like fight off cancer, as an example, which is kind of a 24-hour a day job. You can do those things because you're not spending all of that energy digesting. So I think for anybody who's able to get to one meal a day, and obviously the closer to carnivore you are with that dietary pattern is important because you get your essential foods. You don't want to fill your belly with non-essential things if you're only eating once a day. And I really have to emphasize that to my patients who are thinking about that. You got to really get that protein and fat in if it's going to work. Yeah.
It's interesting. You know what I've noticed lately? This is just over the last month.
Hmm.
I always used to think I need to eat more. I need to eat a lot of fat, which is true at
Hmm.
the beginning of carnivore.
Yeah.
But I found I was almost over consuming fat. I was
Yeah.
like
You
too
can.
worried about not, and I saw it in my bowel movements, and now I don't really add any extra fat. I When I
Yeah.
first started, I would put tallow on my ribeye
Right.
steaks.
Right.
Now, but I think I needed it then, right?
Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
body
Yeah.
adjusts.
Oh
But
yeah. You're trying to get
yeah,
it primed. And I also think that sometimes I've seen patients have weight loss stalls, and sometimes it's because they're too heavy on the protein, and most people in the community know that gluconeogenesis will be one of the outcomes of too much protein, which then can lead to some extra glucose that your body didn't need to make. So I do think that we need to be careful because carnivore is kind of a keto diet, meaning that it's high fat. But again, everybody is different. Everybody has different needs, and I think it's important that we're flexible. And I think you probably naturally migrated to high fat meats anyway, so you're kind of getting plenty of fat, so there's probably no need to keep adding. And then you tweak it, and sometimes you do it a little different based on the week and what you're eating. So I do think that that's all true, and it's a big experiment. That's why, and particularly when you're dealing with your belly, like your belly will let you know immediately if it's not happy. So I'm trying really, and I'm still kind of in the I will, I'm not as strict. So in other words, I will periodically have a pizza with a crust that's made of meat or chicken, but I may still have a little tomato sauce. But my theory is you eat what you can tolerate. However, it's clear to me based on my experience when I'm not doing carnivore 100%, there's a little risk. There's a little potential that that tomato sauce is going to be a problem.
yeah,
So I think that people just have to listen to their body. There are days when you're just going to indulge and not worry about the outcome because you're just indulging. But the cleaner you are, the more likely you're not going to run into trouble, depending on what you're trying to treat. And for belly problems, you got to be really careful.
yeah.
So and this is kind of the question that I want to ask you based on your experience. And it's kind of similar to what we just talked about, which is, um, everybody doesn't have to be a carnivore, right? So when you're thinking about um, this need to be carnivore or keto, is it what we just talked about, or are there other things you think about as reasons for people to want, do it either way?
I think the key difference to me is addiction.
Mm.
That's addiction to sugar and carbs. I
Yes,
think
sir.
when you have I've always had a more addictive personality. That's
Hmm.
just how I am wired. My wife will tell me that, and not everyone's like that. Like,
Right. Right.
and so I found that when I would open a keto ice cream, which was
Hmm.
delicious,
Of
I would
course.
end up wanting to eat, and I could control myself. I have good willpower, but I would end up wanting to eat the whole carton.
That's right. And you're thinking
And
about it.
exactly. Same thing with keto cookie dough and
Yeah.
keto
Yeah.
granola. Not, o- not only it's expensive too. I mean, they were pricey,
Oh
and
yeah.
I loved it. And so I found myself kind of craving that all the time. And it was fine for weight loss. I mean, it didn't really add any pounds, but it was bad for constantly eating,
Yeah.
upset my stomach. So to me, that's the main carnivore almost it retrains your body. You don't really yearn for any of that anymore because you've
Hmm.
eliminated the taste. So
Yeah.
that's the key difference.
And I don't like, as much as I like ribeye and lamb. And there are moments when I'm like, I can't wait to get to it, right? But I don't know that it's just different. Like I don't sit there and think about it. Now, if we make a keto friendly cake or whatever, right? And then I'm having my ketovore week, right? Or a day. Um, you think about that.
Oh
You
yeah.
just you're thinking about it at work. It's just crazy, and that's why I sympathize with people who are dealing with food or processed food, sugar or processed food addictions, because you're gonna be thinking about it. You don't really think about the lamb that way. It's just different. And
No.
and is it delicious when you take that bite? Absolutely. You love it in that moment, but you just don't think about it, and it's not like always on your mind. And so now, not only do you have more energy at work, but your ability to focus is partly because you're not thinking about food at all. It's like there's a lot of things to focus on, and one of them won't be food. So, and you're not sitting there, oh, I can't wait to put that whipped cream on that cake, and it's keto friendly. So, like you said, it won't raise my wife's blood sugars and all of that. But I just don't have the bandwidth to think about food. And when I kind of look at my team, they they come to work talking about what we're gonna have for lunch. I mean, they're just like, and it's just not to mention the resources. The guy who's probably making the higher income is the one that's bringing some in, and the people it's like crazy. So I'm always trying to kind of gradually say, hey, you should think about bringing some stuff in, just to save money and things like that. So it's a lot to learn here. But now let's think about, your day job and you just being a spiritual guy. So when it comes to that and food, so has there been any connections between food and spirituality that has, you know helped you help others, or even just help you in your own journey?
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the harder things about being a carnivore rabbi is many Jewish practices surround food.
Mm,
So, for example, you have the Passover meal, which is kind of cool because it's centered around a lamb. So,
right.
you have that, but there are certain foods that are associated with it. Matzah,
Right. Right.
which is unleavened bread, parsley. Um, there's a mixture called haroset, which is walnuts and apples and honey. And so there are foods that I just don't eat. Like I have drawn the line for myself, say,
Mhm.
it's part of I mean, we had a big Passover Seder at my house. My parents, so we do the rituals, but I've kind of said, I'm not going to do this. Now,
Right.
maybe in future years, if I'm a little less strict, I would have a little bit.
Mhm.
I have a little taste of I mean, I put a little bit in, but I really basically don't indulge. So that is a little hard.
Mhm.
But to me, there's a Jewish teaching that says, and the saving a life, pikuach nefesh, overrides all other commandments.
Hmm.
And saving a life doesn't just literally mean physical life, although that's the primary meaning. It can also mean your mental health, your So to me, this is something for my health, that I am protecting my health and my well-being by not consuming.
Yeah.
Maybe that will change in the future. But I think one thing it has done for me is that I mean, I had some food addiction issues, but not like some people who embrace carnivore. I mean, our friend Carrie has shared
Hmm.
so many stories of people who overcome horrible addictions, people lose hundreds and hundreds of pounds. I now better understand how emotionally fraught food is for so many people. And
Hmm.
I think that carnivore has given me some clarity about that. I see, just hearing people's stories, I see what it can do. I think that's made me a more empathetic person as a rabbi. I mean, a lot of this started for me. I mean, I found keto, but one of the reasons I was open to keto is I have a daughter. She's now 17, and this was maybe, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. And she was diagnosed with celiac.
Mm.
So she can't eat gluten. I mean, she was going through so much pain.
Mm.
And seeing when she got that diagnosis, I started reading up on celiac like crazy. And that opened my eyes to alternative nutrition. That was a real change. And I also admired how disciplined she became.
Hmm.
So all of that, I think, has made me a better rabbi in that I'm just more open to seeing
That's
the
right.
range of emotional issues people have around food. And
Yeah.
it's really it's incredible. And if you don't have that empathy, that openness, and you haven't experienced it yourself, it's something you never know.
Yeah. And I think about, I'll be honest, I still don't see the level of um appropriate recommendations focused around diet in our gastroenterology community. And I'm thinking about, I mean, you literally have a medical condition that would benefit tremendously from this dietary pattern, but they're not really, it's not really being shared. It's still medicine centric, and
Yeah.
I'm just amazed by that. So that's why, again, that's why this need to share these messages. And I
Yeah.
think hearing testimonials about what happens to real people is very important.
And
I
having
know.
doctors like you. I mean,
Yeah.
we can I can say all kinds of stuff, but doctors bring a credibility to it
Yeah. Yeah.
that's so essential.
Yeah. And again, I think as we continue to try to transform these health systems, that's going to have to be a big part of it. And I think, we're actually moving the needle. I mean, I earlier today I had a meeting talking about our food pharmacy, our smart farm, and how we're going to kind of continue to spread that to our various hospitals where we give out food, we grow food. And I think that that model is hopefully going to grow to the point where the other health systems, like, we should do that too. And then we can get more people. And yes, even a carnivore doctor can recommend growing vegetables. I mean, we don't want to get crazy with this, right? And for some people, like my wife is more keto, and so she likes having her vegetables. All I care about is your blood sugar okay?
That's right.
And if she's good there, then I'm good there. So that's how kind of how I see it. Now, one of the things that will make a doctor pause is the studies, right? And although a lot of doctors are not focused on nutrition, we know that there are times when nutrition studies are not as helpful. So when you got into this space and you were doing research, how were you digesting the science, and did it create more confusion, or did it kind of provide clarity for you?
Initially, it created more confusion.
Hmm.
Um, and that's because there's so many studies showing so many different things.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and when you're not a doctor or not a scientist, and I'm sure even as doctors, it can be confusing.
Yeah.
It, it, that I had a hard time navigating that.
Hmm.
To me, it's almost a similar thing if you do investments, if you're investing in your retirement plan and you get all these different recommendations from so
Hmm.
many different people.
That's right.
And a lot of it comes down to who do you trust? Who do you
Hmm.
trust? And trust. And how do you know who to trust? And a lot of it to me, and it was almost sort of a gut. I trust my gut a lot. I trust
Yeah, your
and
gut.
and people like you and Dr. Chafee, I kind of just I felt an authenticity.
Hmm.
Some people can be great actors, and
Right, right.
but in that, so there was a kind of trust that I had, and then also was how does it make me feel?
Mm,
When carnivore worked so well, I had greater trust. And then the more I learned about studies, many studies, the more um, disillusioned I became.
hmm.
I knew a little bit about it, because I told you my dad's a physician, and he used to tell me the pharmaceutical companies would offer him a lot of money to give certain speeches,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
they were speeches that they gave to him to
that's
deliver.
right.
He
They
didn't
give
write
it
the
to you.
speeches.
Yeah,
And and so I kind of realized a little bit how this works.
yeah.
Not that everyone's bad, and there's certain bad actors, but the system is not set up. The system is often set up to encourage certain results and certain
Hmm.
focuses, even
That's
just by
right.
the topics chosen. So I had some suspicions about it.
Yeah.
Um, and so that made me look to more influencers that I could trust. And my own general practitioner at Northwestern, um, he's certainly not a fan of it. But when I told
Hmm.
him what I was doing, and he said, you look great, you sound great, he's just keep on doing it.
Right, right.
Not and that to me was a good. He was not anti,
Yeah.
and so that kind of that was a great experience.
And I'm glad you mentioned your physician. Shout out to your physician at Northwestern,
Yeah.
because it's important that we at least do that. Like, I don't necessarily want to convert my doctor, but I do want to, at the minimum, if I can model something that's working, maybe one day they'll realize maybe that's not a bad thing. Now, we're blessed that some of these larger organizations are starting to endorse it, but um well, particularly low carb and keto, we're still working on the carnivore part, but I just think doctors who are willing to say, man, it's working. I mean, what really doesn't make sense and has never made sense is the doctor that sees it's working and says, you got to get off that diet, it's killing you. I say, well, doc, my blood pressure is better, my blood sugar is better, my cholesterol numbers are actually looking pretty good, particularly the quality of them. um, I'm feeling better. I've lost weight. My energy is better. So why would I then stop that? And when doctors do that, then we have Houston, we have a problem.
Yes.
So I just think we have to do better in that sense. Be comfortable knowing that most of us have blind spots, most of us have knowledge gaps, and very few of us, except for those who spent a little extra education in nutrition, learned anything about nutrition. And guess what? Even when you go to school for nutrition, a lot of that information is not great either. I mean, the stuff that they're still teaching still leans us away from these dietary patterns. Even as we're starting to get permission from organizations, they're still saying plant-based diet is still best. And it's very it's based on those old fears, saturated fat, cancer risks that have been debunked. And it's amazing that they just haven't gotten the memo that they've been debunked.
Yeah.
It's always the small print. It's always the small print when they say, okay, I guess you're right, but we're not going to put that on the breaking news at CNN.
That's
We're not
right.
going to do that. So I think we still, again, have that's the theme of this podcast. We have a lot of work to do. Now, you see people do better. You've obviously seen yourself do better. And we always call that kind of anecdotal evidence. So when you think about what you've seen around you, are there enough people around you that you've seen have success, friends, family, associates, or is it more in the low carb community that you're seeing the success, and obviously the literature as well?
It's more in the low carb community, people I connect with on Facebook. I certainly I see more examples of keto with people
Hmm.
around me. That I don't have too many people in my direct social contacts that are carnivore. A few actually. I mean, there
Hmm.
are some. I think I've inspired a couple of people. That I definitely have had friends who tried carnivore and they do great and then they
Yeah.
stop.
Right,
I
right,
don't know,
right,
it's just too hard or they don't,
right.
but they fully admit it's great. Um, you know, one kind of interesting thing I've noticed is that it's generally people who are a little older that embrace the
Mm,
carnivore diet. Yeah, 40s is like young. It's almost people in their early, and I think part of that is your body does change. When you're young, you can almost throw anything at it. And
right.
not
That's true.
everybody, but a lot. And when you're older, you've kind of tried other things and you see
That's
they
right.
don't work.
That's
And
right.
so I don't have that many people in my orbit who do.
Hmm.
Um, but I definitely have noticed, my wife, um, she's always been, she's just healthy naturally.
Hmm.
But she eats more meat now, a lot more
Mm.
meat, and she feels better. I mean, she tells
Yeah,
me. And
that's right.
so I think that that's been another positive. Uh, my kids, so I have a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, and I almost think sometimes if I wanted them to be carnivores, I would go the opposite, say don't be carnivores. Like
Right.
they want to do the opposite of what their dad does sometimes. But I have seen that they're definitely become more disciplined in what they eat. They're at least more mindful. A lot of kids
Okay.
just shove things in their mouth. They're more mindful of things. They know about carbs. I mean, I didn't know what a carb. I didn't know
Right.
what that stuff was when I was a teenager. So I think that there is some positive effect I'm seeing.
That's cool, and I'm glad to hear that. And you're right. I think it's a little bit of a bubble. Obviously, my house is filled with people. My kids, obviously, they have their moments when they're just like, "I'm just going to get a gyro, Dad. It is what it is," you know. But again, they're metabolically in pretty good shape. In fact, my oldest son, Brandon, he does, he dances and
That's a
teaches dance.
musician? Is it because
Yeah,
you?
he
Yeah.
yeah, he's amazing, man. That kid. He was not a dancer. He didn't do anything, but he just got interested, and look at him now. So he's doing his thing. So it's beautiful to see your kids thrive. So now, the glue that made me notice you was your commenting. You did a great video. I'll probably link to the video also, where you talked about the first carnivore study. I was like, oh, he's going to talk about the Harvard study, and no, you weren't talking about that at all. You're talking about a study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association many, many years ago. So I thought it would be fun for my audience to hear you just summarize a little bit about what that study was and what they found, because I think a lot of people haven't even heard of it.
Well, it goes back to this guy, Wilhelm Stefansson, who was an anthropologist and an Arctic explorer. I mean,
Hmm.
the real deal. He went and lived among the Eskimos, the Inuit.
Wow.
Yeah. And he taught at Harvard. I mean, he was well-trained academic. And he went, I think it was 1907,
Hmm.
first expedition. And initially, he brought a whole bunch of Western foods with him, and he was splitting. He was eating some of the Inuit diet and some Western.
Hmm.
And then there was supposed to be a ship that was going to meet him with other explorers and more food, and the ship didn't make it to the Arctic Circle. So he basically then had to adopt the Inuit diet
That's
if
right.
he
That's
eat.
right.
And it worked. He said he had never felt better. He went and hunted. He ate walrus, fish, I mean, he said 90% meat. And he noticed the fattiest parts of the meat was the most prized. Uh,
Hmm.
and he said there was no cavities, there's no heart
Hmm.
disease, they were tall, healthy. And he wrote about this when he came back. And he really popular. I think the name of his sort of really popular book, which didn't come out till later, but he was writing some, it's called The Fat of the Land, I believe.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, anyways, when he had this experience, when he got back, he had all kinds of meetings with people at the Mayo Clinic, with the head of what was, I don't think it was called the FDA back then, but it was the equivalent of the FDA, with
Wow.
the dean at Johns Hopkins, which was like the medical school of the time, because he was sort of a celebrity figure.
Right. Right.
And um, ultimately, he pushed these doctors at Bellevue Hospital in New York to do a study of an all meat diet where he and this one other guy. So this is not the class. This is not the really totally by the book experiments.
Right. 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 Right.
It's 1920s. And so for 1 year, they ate only,
Wow.
and there was a protocol. So there were periods where they only ate lean meat. but basically anything, including organs, once a week
Hmm.
liver. And the only time they got a little sick was when they were eating only lean meat. And otherwise, they were in incredible health. And one of my favorite notes, somewhere in the
Wow.
study, it said, and uh, their bowel movements were fewer and did not smell as bad.
You
No,
better say it. You better know it.
and, and so it was this resoundingly successful study. And um, he became, I mean, Stefansson was really probably one of the very first modern carnivores. He would eat slabs
Yeah,
of butter, um, and he wrote about it, spoke about it. He died at 82, I think, in the 1950s. He had a stroke. I mean, so some people, there were a couple of commenters, you always get commenters on
of
YouTube. And
course.
he is horror. I mean, he's 82, which at the time is pretty old.
Yes.
And, he was an Arctic explorer. I mean, the guy probably did a lot to his body. But he was in unbelievable health and coherence. There's some interviews on YouTube with him.
Oh,
uh,
really?
yeah,
Okay.
you could see just how well spoken and simple and clear he was.
That's right.
And so that was really, I think, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but sort of the real first all total carnivore
That's
study.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. I love that. And it's how ironic all these years we've been told to eat lean meat, and that was the one thing that messed it up, right? So
True.
fat is
So,
our friend.
yes. And who else was influenced by Stefansson
Hmm.
was the bear, Owsley Stanley, who was he was he's such an interesting historical figure. He was the sound guy for the Grateful Dead.
Hmm.
He was he at age 24, he went on an all meat diet and he
Hmm.
basically ate meat for the rest of his life.
Mm.
He was a genius. I mean, he created sort of the modern sound system that's still used at concerts. And he wrote about carnivore. And he quotes a lot from Stefansson. And he talked about how reading Stefansson's articles and books, he had articles in Harper's Magazine and then his book, that is what um that is what led him to the carnivore diet. So I think that even though the study's not that well known, it had a lot of ramifications.
Yeah, I can see that. I just love history. Didn't like history when I was in school. I think it may have been the teachers, with all due respect to them. I think you got to keep it interesting, but I love learning that history and putting things in perspective and use a little common sense.
That's right.
And at the minimum, we can say it sounds like for a percentage of our population, this may be the right answer.
Yes.
And I know for me and you, it is. So in your mind, is that why you think this type of study is relevant because it kind of exposes people who have concerns to, well, they've been doing this even back then.
Yes, I do. And I think studies have value. And
Hmm.
I actually think, and I said this in the video too, that sometimes older studies have
Hmm.
more validity because
Mm,
they're not as corrupted by the agendas. We
right.
all know that so many studies are funded by pharmaceutical companies and funded by government, which is great. I mean, government is essential to studies. You have to have the NIH. I mean, there would be no studies without it. But there are agendas. There
Hmm.
are certain goals. And this was before, we know the American Heart Association was funded by Procter and Gamble, and the American Diabetes Association got, all of these kind of places that fund studies. It's not it's not pure science.
No.
But going back to the 1920s, it's closer to pure science. Of course, there are
Right.
problems then too, but it is, I think, more authentic. You know what else? I just read this recently. The first edition of Atkins' book
Hmm.
was much harder on carbs. He was much more critical of carbs than later editions of the book because later editions of the book were after the food pyramid came out. And the
Mm,
man wanted to sell a lot of books and
that's
he
right.
had products. I mean, they can't, he had a business, but
That's right.
things change. We are influenced by our culture. So sometimes the older studies have less bias, I have found. So that's kind of why I liked it too.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm just, again, just creating awareness. Now, let me ask you this. I think you linked to the study. So is there a way for us to share a link to the study
Yeah,
that yeah.
yeah, it's just on JAMA. It's an
Okay.
issue of JAMA.
Okay, cool. So let's make sure we share that. I'll share that with the podcast slash video, and that way people can check that out. One other study you mentioned in another video was this Maryland keto study that you shared, and I wanted to create awareness about that study too, because you were kind of fussing a little bit about how they dealt with that study, and let me hear your reaction to that.
Which one was that? That
That was the one that I think they, closed it down. They stopped the
oh,
study, you
oh
remember
yeah,
that? That's some
yeah.
crazy. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
It's unbelievable. I mean, there seemed to be no basis for
Yeah,
shutting it down. And these
yeah,
were patients who were in really bad shape.
yeah.
And there was some promising. I mean, this is where I think keto may it's diseases like bipolar and schizophrenia. You know, as I said, my dad's a psychiatrist. I know these are very, very hard
Oh,
to treat.
yeah,
I mean,
very, very.
and so anything that can help is is necessary to explore and to shut something down.
I know.
And I think I I don't know what from what I read, there was no reason given. But if you can treat something like this with diet, then we are that really hurts drug companies that are trying to. I
Oh,
don't want
of
to sound like a
course. Yeah,
conspiracy theorist, but
yeah.
why not? Why not explore it?
That's right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe you've had contact, but the people that I'm really inspired by is the Bazuki family, the guy
Mhm,
that started Roblox. He's a
mhm.
billionaire, and he had a son who had severe bipolar, and keto helped cure him, or at least get him to a place where he's
That's right.
incredibly high functioning.
That's right.
Oh, but I mean, we need that. We
Uh,
need people like that to go out and
yeah.
and help.
Yeah, and there will always be a need for medicines. Even Dr. Georgia E would say, maybe a third, maybe 40% of the patients can get off medicines, but that means other people can't. So, but I guess it's just not enough profit, I guess. I think if people are doing it for the right reason, I understand that the companies are, kind of loyal to the profit and the investors, but man, if we want to live in the kind of society we can be proud of, we have to make sure people have access to. So to shut down a study uh, for who knows what reason, but we can kind of speculate it's probably not for the right reason. So,
Right.
and that's why, as we're kind of wrapping up, I think this work we're doing almost feels like activism in a way. So, why do you think it's important that we kind of share the messages we're sharing? Do you feel like an activist now that you have a YouTube channel?
Oh yeah, I do. And I think it's so important. And it goes back to something you kind of said earlier. I don't think everyone has to do this, but
That's
I
right.
want people to know it's an option. I
Yes.
would have liked to know, I think if I had known when my daughter got diagnosed with celiac that keto was a potential way of eating that would have really helped her, uh,
Yes.
I would have liked to have known about that. I would have liked to have known when I was having stomach pains that maybe, it's my nutrition. Maybe it's what I'm eating that's causing all the inflammation. I would have liked to have at least had that in the toolkit. I
Hmm.
wouldn't have to do it, but to know it's there. So I do feel like I'm an activist. And also it kind of makes me more grateful for social media. As a parent of two teenage girls, I got a lot of problems with social media.
I can imagine.
Yeah, but we wouldn't be able to connect. I wouldn't know about so many other people if it wasn't for YouTube and Facebook to a lesser extent, but that we have to use these means of sharing this message. And um, you know, when my grandfather was a doctor, the idea that you would question the doctor was unheard of. I mean, he was one of the old school. You went to the doctor and you did exactly what the doctor said. We don't live in that era anymore. And I think the best doctors know that. And so they are open to more information. They are open to
Right.
learning what's out there on YouTube. So I feel like almost a responsibility to be out there talking about it. It really, because it can help more people, it can really at least give people more options.
That's right. I love that. And again, thank you so much for being out there. Um I there's so many angles and perspectives, and that's why you kind of stood out a little bit to add the rabbi to the carnivore was unique. And again, maybe somebody who they'll only see the rabbi part and they'll listen,
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
And that'll be awesome. So we get that community, and that doesn't mean that they may just feel entertained by the just looking. Some people, I used to laugh at some relatives who would have popcorn and sit down and watch the workout video.
I
I'm
mean,
like, it wasn't designed for you just to watch it as entertainment, but but hopefully a few people who have issues and have problems to solve, they'll see and hear you, and
That's right.
they'll be blessed with the message. So, in terms of protecting your nest over the next 12 months, any areas beyond carnivore that you're going to focus on?
I always I focus on just kindness and love in my
Mm,
relationships. As I've said several times, I have two teenagers. I'm at that point, they're kind of looking towards the future and just cherishing them and
yeah.
being a good model for them and spending time. I do find that carnivore, it simplifies life to a degree.
Hmm.
And you
Hmm.
kind of focus on what really matters. My wife, she's a rabbi also, and we got invited to do a bat mitzvah in Costa Rica. It was great. I
Hmm.
mean, it was, I'm not going to complain about it,
That's
but we
right.
were put up at this beautiful hotel, and we kind of were like, this is all nice, but this is not what we really want. We've kind of
Right.
simplified our life a little bit, and I really cherish that simplicity.
Hmm.
So I credit carnivore with a big chunk of that, just really enjoying what really matters, the people around us. That to me is protecting our nest.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a beautiful way to wrap up this episode because simplicity, even as we're thinking about our next move, the kids are going to be leaving soon. And do we, what do we do? Get a bigger house? Do we get a smaller house? Do we, all of these decisions, but the happiness probably won't come from those things. It'll probably come from just having experiences with the people you love.
Yes.
And so we're gonna probably invest a lot of energy into experiences
Good.
and making sure we, maybe, spend time on how do I have a better marriage, make that richer, So I think that's a great way to wrap up. And obviously, we want to make sure that people know how to get to your channel, and you wrote things, but tell me a little bit about how people can get to your resources.
It's just Carnivore Rabbi,
Yeah,
RABBI, and you can type that in on YouTube or just Google it,
that's
and it'll
right.
come up. And I would be so grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, and keep doing that great work. We'll keep connected, and I'll definitely continue to enjoy your content. I'm a subscriber now, so
Dr.
so
Hampton.
very, very much excited about that, and I'll try to add my voice to the conversations periodically as you kind of get stuff out there. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. And again, we're local, so you never know. We'll
We got to get together.
connect that. You got to do something because it's so easy to do that. So I appreciate you, man. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll
Thank
wrap up with a few comments.
you. Okay. Thanks, Dr. Hampton.
All right. So today, guys, we dove a little into this interesting carnivore diet study that was conducted many years ago in 1920s or so, provided a little additional evidence for those who are still on the fence that carnivore is unlikely to harm us. In fact, it may actually help us, especially when it comes to the things that my guest's dad was doing, which is dealing with mental illness for sure, and we know that's a fact. And I think for us, we are just so grateful because our bellies don't have to deal with those irritating grains and legumes and things that used to give us a lot of bloating and gas and constipation. And I just hope and wish that for everybody. You do not have to live like this for the rest of your life. There's another way. You don't have to spend the rest of your life looking for the nearest bathroom or hoping that when you're around your friends and family, you can control your body and not have an accident. So I really think that that's one of the benefits that carnivore will bring to those who are thinking about this, just a diet that will make it easier to lose weight, to shape your body into the way you want it to be, and to reduce inflammation in your body. And if you understand anything, something like asthma is inflammation. Arthritis is inflammation. Autoimmune diseases, they're all inflammation. So when you adopt a dietary pattern, when you remove the things that cause inflammation, life's going to be much better. So make sure to share this episode with anyone who's carnivore curious, keto, low carb curious, and they're just needing to hear another voice, a voice of a carnivore rabbi. And I'm loving that. So as usual, I always appreciate you guys coming to my channel. Like, subscribe, share if you're on YouTube, and of course, comment if you're using a podcast app. Just continue your journey towards wellness, because if you do a good job there, you may bless your family because they may be curious enough to want to do the same. And I just think that we all deserve to be here as long as possible. And we just want to be here so we can spread messages that will help us not only live our purpose, but to help others to do the same. So I thank you again for coming to this episode of the Protecting Your Nest podcast. And until the next episode, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.